Welcome to episode 2 of The Direct Line powered by 10Bet. And on today's show, we have a very special guest in the studio. He is none other than the laboratory director of the NHA, Dr. Schalk De Kock, who talks to us about how horses are tested here in South Africa and how we stack up against the rest of the world. We'll also go to Nico's notebook at the end of the show, where I have a look at 2 incidents that took place at Fairview Racecourse this last Tuesday, the 12th of August. Looking forward to having you on the show. So last week, across my desk came the following. It was a press release issued by the NHA saying that the NHA laboratory obtains a 100% result in proficiency tests and reaffirms ISO IEC 17025 quality compliance. It sounds like all Greek to me, but at the end of the day, it went on to say what a wonderful establishment the laboratory is here in South Africa as far as horse racing is concerned. So I decided to get hold of Dr. Schalk De Kock, who's the laboratory director at the NHA, invite him in to go through exactly what was contained in the press release, but also to ask him a lot of varying questions that I have that I want to find out a bit more about. And he joins us in studio here at the Direct Line. Thanks very much, Schalk, for coming.
Thank you, Nico, for the opportunity. And thanks for the compliments. And nice opportunity for us to talk about racehorse integrity control.
Let's get something out of the way first. The doctor in your title does not refer to you being a vet.
No, I'm a doctorate in biochemistry, and I previously worked in the pharmaceutical industry, which obviously gave me quite a nice background on drug substances. But we liaise obviously with the veterinarians quite well. Very important. We make then a very nice scientific team that's very enlightened and
so you deal a lot with the veterinarians, and over the years that you worked there, which is a number of years now,
25 years about in total.
25. You've got to learn about what the vets actually do.
Yes, you've got to be interested in the horses. I'm interested in dealing with the horse physiology and what the veterinarians do, and that gives you insights that are also very important for our integrity control.
Let's talk about the laboratory, because it's a world-class facility. In fact, probably the envy of a lot of other horse racing jurisdictions, because it's been set up for a number of years now, but you've kept up to date with the technology, with what you test for and your testing mechanisms and so forth. Just tell whoever's watching today what our laboratory does, and it's been established for a long time, but how up to the times you've kept.
Well, internationally, of course, there's certain requirements, and the requirements are there to actually keep racing fair and organized. And then also for the horses. The horses, they can't choose what happens to them and how they get treated. So we got to represent them. Welfare control is very, very important. We have a challenge, of course, that horse racing is not enormously big in this country. So we don't have an enormous budget. So that actually means against the odds, we actually got to comply with these international standards, keep up with them, and actually exceed them in many respects. What we do is obviously on race days, we have to test the horses after races, but we're extending it now more to not just urine testing, but also blood testing, pre-race, even when the horses start qualifying, post-race, and we're looking for lots of different substances. And then also, it's not just doing racing that we're worried about the horses. We're also worried about the horses when they're actually in the stables and they're not racing and they're actually during rest period. So that's when they do out-of-competition assessments in the stables, veterinarians involved, and specimens get collected, and we analyze those. Of course, also the jockeys, they ride these very expensive animals, and they can also have an effect. So they also get tested for substances which would affect their judgment on the track and safety on the track.
Stop there. Just on the human side, so on the jockey side. So I know, because I've commentated for many years, that you choose at random jockeys to get tested by providing urine samples. Is that right? And then you test on that.
Yes, urine is a non-invasive specimen, so it's for the jockeys get tested before the races. But of course, there is a program by which all these jockeys actually get routinely cycled through that they all get tested. No jockey can actually just suddenly not be part of the testing program.
And when you pick up something that a jockey may have in his system, what happens next?
Investigation, obviously. It normally goes into an inquiry process for jockeys because they're quite clear on which substances they're allowed to use and not use. Obviously, certain substances like drugs of abuse is quite problematic.
Yeah.
But we're also worried about substances that affect the health of the jockeys, like, for instance, weight loss, water loss drugs, which is very bad for the kidneys. So it's not just it's actually quite comprehensive, and obviously, if they have problems, that's where we there as a consultative capacity to some extent.
Now, when you're testing for the horses, what was remarkable for me to find out is that if a horse has got something in its system, you're able to pick that out. And what you gave me the stat was, and I've written it down here, it's almost like figuring out that it's 1 second in 32 years. So in other words, if the smallest amount of that prohibited substance was in the horse, you'd be able to pick it up almost to that extent.
Yes. The whole issue here is if you go on medication, obviously you're looking for a huge effect to give you a huge benefit as a human, for instance. But then there's also a level by which the substance is much lower, but it's still having an effect. And that they call it the therapeutic cutoff level.
Right.
And for a lot of substances that we're dealing with, and of course, with horse racing, we're dealing with such a wide range of substances. We're dealing with the veterinarian supplied veterinary drugs. We're dealing with human drugs that can be introduced. We're dealing with drugs from the black market. We're dealing with drugs from the internet coming into it. So it's a huge range of substances. A lot of those substances are pharmaceutical substances, are highly potent, and they actually have an effect on 1 part per billion in blood or in urine. And 1 part per billion is 1 second in 32 years, or I think it's something like a teaspoon in an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Right.
Now, we mustn't just be capable of detecting these. We must be able to identify it absolutely and prosecute on it, that we can prove it in a court of law that it's present. So obviously that takes a huge sophistication. It takes a lot of scientific knowledge, and it takes quite an expensive infrastructure and laboratory to do that. And that's an expertise that takes a while to establish, and we're fortunate to have that. And I'm fortunate to have an excellent team in the laboratory that's been working with me for at least 20 years, 4 people. It makes such a difference. That is how we can actually get to these successes.
I know when trainers have been found that there's a substance or that you want to prosecute, that they've got the chance of doing what's called a B sample.
Yes.
And what happens with that is that you send it overseas test it. Is that right?
The whole mechanism, and I think it's the same in human sports, is that 2 specimens get collected. And there's an A specimen, which we call the original South Africa, that we then analyze. And then there's a B specimen, which is the reference, which is then available for the trainer, and it gets stored securely, locked up at the laboratory. We're not really having access to the inside of that specimen. And that's then available for the trainer to say, well, I'm contesting this result. I want it analyzed overseas. Because obviously not all laboratories can actually have the capability to look for it, but then it can be sent to accredited laboratories overseas. And we're actually in the process of some of that tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So it happens, and it's a nice mechanism to say that they've got an opportunity to almost appeal to that result and have it analyzed somewhere else. And
we normally use the Hong Kong Jockey Club as our backup.
The laboratories that obviously most respected is the Hong Kong Jockey Club. France has got a very nice laboratory, and then England has also got a very nice laboratory associated with the British Horse Racing Authority. So those are the 3 laboratories that we actually have on our list at the moment.
And if that B sample is tested the same as it was tested here, then obviously that's pretty watertight, isn't it?
That's watertight. I think it's basically case closed, because it's basically been verified on a specimen that's been untouched until it's actually been opened overseas.
Is the cost at the expense of the person involved in the industry then that has to afford that cost?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, analyzing specimens in South Africa, we try and keep it inexpensive.
Yes.
If you send these specimens overseas, it's very expensive. So they're gonna have to pay for the analysis and then also the special transport,
right,
to make sure that these specimens actually stay in a proper, stable condition.
The buzzword for the last couple of years in South African horse racing is TCO2. Mm-hmm. Not many people understand what the whole issue is about, but there are certain levels that horses have to comply with the TCO2 levels, and it's done now regularly on race days. Horses are subjected, or again, certain amount of horses per race are subjected to this at a high cost, might I add, to the NHA, when you take into account that every race has got their own TCO2 testing. But talk down to us if you want to. What on earth is going on? What is TCO2 and why are we testing for it, and what difference does it make to a horse?
Okay, well, firstly, I mean, like the testing we do is in line with international requirements. It's international requirement that prior to racing, horses are not allowed to have levels of TCO2 too high in their blood. What is the issue is that obviously when horses run and they run a distance and they get this exertion, they get their muscles actually start aching. And a lot of that aching is actually lactic acid that actually accumulates in the muscles.
Right.
Now, focus on the word acid. So what TCO2 is basically where alkalinity, which neutralizes acidity, is actually introduced into the horse. And it's introduced with bicarbonate, and bicarbonate, it actually releases TCO2, which is total carbon dioxide, and the blood levels of total carbon dioxide then obviously elevates. And that higher level of carbon dioxide, it neutralizes lactic acid, but it obviously also is detrimental to the horse because you're actually adding the balance of the horse is actually totally affected by this elevated alkalinity, which is not good to the horse, and it's seen as affecting race performance. Considered, I think that's why the IFHA rules comes into it, and it's also, I think, a welfare issue that these high levels are obviously detrimental, changing the playing field, and not ideal for the health of the horse.
Is it not then the masking of pain necessarily? It's got nothing to do with the masking of pain, but it's more to do with the neutralizing the acid then.
Yes, but the neutralization of acid obviously then actually has an effect that the horse experiences it differently if they've got that buffer capacity from the TCO2.
And internationally, is this being done as well?
Yes,
is it
yes,
at the level that we're doing it here now? Because we're pretty strict on it here.
Australia, it's very significant. They've actually got mobile vans that drive around to the racetracks to make sure that they can get to all these events and test these horses beforehand. So enormous amount of effort, I know, especially Australia and New Zealand. Yes.
Yeah. And it's important, I suspect, for South African racing that we have a setup as controlled as we do now under your leadership, Schalk, because people bet on these races. It doesn't sit well with people to bet on races and to accept outcomes of races that people question. So you need to be on top of your game all the time.
To me, there's two aspects. The one is actually obviously level playing fields, which means otherwise it's unfair and it's not good for the sport long term, obviously, and its perception. And then the other aspect is the horse, of course. The horse welfare is an issue. So a lot of the testing we do is then, fortunately for both of them, we cover both of them, because I think horse welfare is also very important as an aspect to show how committed we are to the health of the horse and how the horse experiences racing. I must say something. When I joined National Horse Racing from the pharmaceutical industry, which was amazing to me, is to see all these people working at our integrity National Horse Racing and how they love horses, and the veterinarians, horse veterinarians, because that's what they do, and the experience we have from a lot of our staff in horse racing. It's lovely, and it actually comes. I was so impressed by the fact that they cared so much for the horses, and that was a very nice environment for me to work in. I think much nicer than sitting in a big tableting plant and making medications.
Yeah. Just the veterinarians, you mentioned the veterinarians, and they're a big part of racing. Every trainer will hire at least one vet or a backup vet if need be. So how does it work with regards? You've got to have a close relationship with those vets, because I suppose they lean on you in terms of what they're allowed to use to medicate horses, and what they're not allowed to use, and what is internationally accepted and what isn't accepted. But what do you do? Do you regularly meet with the veterinarians, with the racecourse veterinarians, or with the veterinarians that are employed by the trainers, should I say? We
prefer not to liaise, obviously, with private veterinarians, and that's where our rules are going to be very clear, and the guidelines we put through to them. but they have a equine veterinary body, and we would actually listen to their concerns. And when we have to change rules from internationally perspective or local perspective, we would explain it to them that they feel it's justified and it's clear to them. What is nice about it is, yes, if there's a specific veterinarian dealing with specific yards, because they can follow the history of a horse, and it's all about the horse recovering. And then any treatments that they give to these horses, it's going to be fully justified. And that is then also what we do check on those.
You talk now about whatever's administered to a horse. So a horse has a passport, but every trainer is required to have a veterinary record of anything administered to a horse, whether it be by the stable itself or by the vet. So when you go and visit stable yards, of which I suspect it's quite rigid,
sure.
And random as well, because you don't want to let trainers know when you're going to go and visit their yards. But what are you checking for when you enter a trainer's establishment with regards to the drugs or the medication that you're looking for?
Well, I think welfare control for horses obviously means it's 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days. So yes, we can't just check in welfare on the race day. We also got to think about when the horse is not racing. So we do what we call out of competition testing, and that is any time when the horse is not racing. So we'll arrive totally unexpected at stable yards, ready to take specimens from horses, ready to confiscate any items, ready to take any photographic evidence. That's obviously in our mandate and in our rules. So we then we actually take records of what they have veterinary treatment registers. Any treatment to the horse must be recorded into those registers. Some of those drugs obviously are veterinary drugs, controlled medications, and they can only be administered by veterinarians. And they will write into these books actual prescriptions and indication of diagnosis. But then other substances can actually be administered by trainers, which is obviously not these registered substances, and that must also be recorded. So we take records of these registers, and we then take specimens from these horses, mainly blood specimens, and we test those. And then when we get the laboratory results, we have to go back and actually say, well, what we see in these horses, does it correspond to what was actually administered to these horses? Have all the administrations been recorded? And then if a substance is found, that's a medication, then we need to see if that medication was actually prescribed by a veterinarian, if it was done properly, and if the concentrations that we see in the specimens actually correspond to that. So it becomes quite a scientific study. And then also with liaison with the veterinarians, but that's, and we do find that, yes, horses do need medications for recovery, and we do see a lot of them, but we see a lot of these being recorded. So we're very happy with the compliance that we have. I think we're happy because people know we're very strict, and they know we can pitch up at any time at the stable yard and take a lot of specimens.
So the chances that if something is administered to a horse that shouldn't be administered, you're going to definitely pick that up at some stage.
Well, that's where our 1 part per billion screening sensitivity comes into.
Yeah.
And then it's then also we're ready to prosecute for those.
So trainers just correct me if I'm wrong here, but so trainers are allowed to administer stuff to horses. Let's say there's therapeutic substances or homeopathic stuff.
You can basically take it to you go to Clicks, and you can buy stuff off the shelf because you can self-medicate yourself.
Yes.
And there's certain things that you obviously are allowed to give.
Yeah.
But then certain substances is behind the counter there, and the pharmacist will only give it to you. So those are the substances which are only being administered by the veterinarians on a prescription, just like your doctor needs to give you a prescription to get that medication. But then there's a lot of substances on the floor, basically, which is beneficial to humans and horses, and you can get them from veterinary suppliers. And those are then substances which the trainers are allowed to administer, but with recording of those, because a lot of those substances we do monitor also.
But you guys have picked up, and I've read some press releases where you've picked up certain substances in the horse that is unlikely to have been picked up anywhere before, and very strange, like out the blue. So you've got you can pick up anything, as you say, but there are certain occasions where you pick up stuff that you've never picked up and you're pretty shocked at.
Well, I think that's also the important aspect to realize that we can't just look at what the veterinarian has in his box, because anything else could also be in this horse, and that's what makes it so challenging. And we report what we see, and we screen for the substances which are internationally required, and that is why we do these proficiency tests to make sure that we're at that level. Not just the range of substances, but also the sensitivities, and that's where it comes into. We need to see the levels where it's having an effect on the horse, and that's where the laboratory needs to obviously. We don't have an enormous budget, and we only have actually 7 scientific staff.
Right.
We have to be very sophisticated in our methodologies and the instrumentation that we have. So we have to keep up. We can't, it's like a race car. You can't just race with the same car for 50 years.
A few years ago, there was that whole caffeine incident whereby it was linked to the nutrition of horses, and the case was that there was in horses' feed. That's where the abnormal levels of caffeine in horses was attributed to the horse's feed and the nutrition. So my next question is, how do you guys monitor the feed, and then does the feed that horses get given have to go through any detection by yourself before a trainer is allowed to use it, or you're not involved in that at all?
In Hong Kong, it's like that because they've got a central stable yard area so they can control the feed coming in. But you can imagine South Africa is a really big place, and teff like that, or those type of things that can be sourced from anywhere. However, the feed manufacturers, they know our requirements. And I know that cattle feed and other feed is not mixed on the same plants anymore. It used to be.
Yes.
So the horse feed manufacturers, they very much know that they have to have a very good quality control of the materials. And I think that's also where horse feed becomes more expensive. Our responsibility is obviously, as soon as we see these things, we have to put warnings out to the industry, and then resolve these issues as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And then other parts of the sport horse area also lean on you to detect anything untoward, things like dressage, show jumping and that?
Yes, they do have an FEI equestrian laboratory overseas, but of course not all specimens can go there. It's only the big events. So we routinely do show jumping, dressage, polo cross, polo, show horses, the saddler type of horses, endurance riding, long distance, we do a lot. We also involved with traditional racing. The reality is there's also traditional racing out there, and we very much realize that it needs to be monitored, controlled, the health of the horses, the welfare of the horses, the training of the jockeys, the equipment of the jockeys, the tracks. So we've got contracts with the different gaming boards in the different provinces. I think we're getting close to all the different provinces, right, where we assist with that, and it actually gets also to prohibited substance control. A contract we also had for 20 years is race pigeons. Race pigeons is a big industry. It's an enormous amount of race pigeons, and we were at one stage we were actually having enormous amount.
Do you have nothing to do with the pigeons now, or do you still do it?
We do for locally. Unfortunately, avian influenza means that we're not really testing for the big international races anymore. But we've actually specialized as one of the big pigeon testing analysis lab.
Wasn't aware
and
of
it's very much related to the same type of substances as the horse racing. So that work then subsidizes the actual equipment that we require for horse racing. So it's a very nice avenue for this.
And have you picked up any irregularities in pigeon racing?
Oh, yes.
You have?
Some of these pigeons, they sell from Belgium, where pigeon racing is basically historically to Asia for 4.5 million euros.
Really? So, for one pigeon?
For one pigeon. It's because they love betting in China.
Yeah.
So they can have their own pigeon loft with all these pigeons and things. So pigeon racing is fascinating.
Absolutely.
Also, the metabolism is very different. That's the other thing. You got to realize these drugs are not just a drug that you see in the horse. They actually get modified and they get excreted, and you see them differently in concentrations and metabolites where they get broken down. If the horse is injected or the horse is given it orally. And then also with pigeons, pigeons actually change these substances. So you got to know about not just the substance, but how it actually gets modified and excreted.
I want to quickly touch on the betting patterns, whether you guys look at betting patterns, because invariably, if there's a substance that has been administered to a horse, the follow-up is that the people associated with that horse are going to want to make money out of this. And you've got to look at betting patterns. Now, betting patterns can be, and I like to look at it at the fixed odds betting provides the most reliable market, because in fixed odds betting, you're able to see trends, whereas the totalizator is not as reliable in picking that up. So what do you guys do in terms of the betting trends? Do you look at the betting trends?
Well, I do nothing because obviously I'm very independent laboratory and I don't really get involved with that. But I think you've answered your own question there. It is important.
It is important. Yeah.
Because I think a irregular betting pattern, it causes suspicion. And if it's linked to other occurrences at the track involving horses and maybe specimens, then I think questions should be asked.
Right. You've got a very busy time doing your job. So do you work in the actual laboratory yourself?
Yes.
Or, so tell me about the laboratory. Tell me where is it first and foremost? Is it in Joburg?
It's in Turffontein,
okay,
hidden there behind security.
Okay, and what is it like in there? I mean, there must be all sorts of fascinating equipment in there.
Well, obviously, you're dealing with specimens that are not to be contaminated. So there's huge procedures of how to treat the specimens. Our specimens actually some of the only in the world that actually get resealed. Huge traceability that nobody can get, not even a lab analyst can actually do anything funny there. And then obviously to see those low levels, you need very sophisticated instrumentation, which has got a very scientific basis. So the instrumentation itself, we're talking about 60, 70 million rand just for the instrument.
Sure.
The analysts, obviously, that takes a long time for them to get to that level where they have that knowledge. And then it's not just about detection, as we say, it's also about the actual fact that that we need to be able to identify to the level that we can take it into a court of law.
Right.
I do a lot of the scientific work. I'm accredited as a racing chemist. And I actually sign off an enormous amount. Well, actually sign off all the data. And we have to keep a lot of hard copies, soft copies. The quality requirements are obviously enormous because you're dealing with livelihoods of trainers and with big legal prosecutions. And so accuracy, quality, seeing these substances, proficiency testing, that all needs to be complied with.
One final question.
Sure.
You mentioned now the legal process and that take place, so that keeps you busy, and obviously you're then required obviously to represent the NHA in these court proceedings, or not really?
If required, I actually write expert reports, and then obviously it gets taken through to the legal side and to the documents being presented. But quite often I do, and the problem is, of course, the trainers, they don't understand it. So I always go into it to say, listen, I'm here to clarify it as much as possible. And even if you can't understand it, hopefully you can see from the way that I explain it to you, and I go through the data, that you can trust that we're doing a proper job. And once again, this is where accreditation comes into it. I can do a lot of big talking, but the actual international accreditation shows that we are compliant to giving a good quality result, which people can trust in prosecution.
Well, Schalk, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you coming and explaining everything. I'm sure that there's a newfound respect amongst those that have watched today's program for the work that you do and for how highly regarded we are worldwide in exactly the advance that we've made in this field over the years that you've been there. Thanks so much for the work you do for horse racing, and all the best going forward.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Right, I've introduced a new section to our podcast, and that's called Nico's Notebook, because I'd picked out certain things over the past week or so that I'd like to chat about very quickly to end off the show with. One of them, in fact, both incidents occurred at Fairview Racecourse, where I happened to be commentating on last Tuesday. And one of them happened in the second race, and it involved the finish of the race, which was between two horses, one called Cosmic Cliffs and the other called Lana View. Came down to the finish line. There was very little to choose between them. Personally, as a commentator, I commentate on what I see. I called Cosmic Cliffs a short-haired winner ahead of Lana View. However, what happened next was incredible, because it hardly ever happens that the photo finish equipment failed on the day at Fairview, and the judges were unable to determine the result from a photo, which they normally use and which is pinpoint accuracy in terms of determining the winner. I was adamant that Cosmic Cliffs had beaten Lana View when they crossed the line, but the judges could not give a result. And it took as many as 15 minutes for them to eventually declare a result. But there was a lot of consternation in the racing industry about the way that this happened. And I want to refer everyone to Rule 65.6, because this is the rule that you're going to see coming up on your screen now, which is very, very clear to everyone concerned. And it is contained in the NHA rules, which says a judge shall satisfy himself as to the correctness of the placings from the photograph. If there is no photograph available due to a failure of the photo finish camera, or if, in the sole opinion of the judge, the images on the photograph are indistinct, then the judge may have regard to the race film to satisfy himself as to the correctness of the placings. If there is no race film available, the judge shall, to the best of his ability, determine the placings as he's personally observed them, and the judge's decision shall be final and binding. That is Rule 65.6. In other words, it meant that because the photographic equipment failed on the day, the judges were allowed then to go and look at the film of the race. So they went downstairs to the outside broadcast unit, which at Fairview is actually inside broadcast, and they looked at the race several times to determine the placings. Together with the stipendiary stewards, they confirmed the result that I had called, that Cosmic Cliffs had beaten Lana View. Now, certain people were unhappy with that, but again, let's go back to the rule, which says that if there was no race film available, in other words, if they couldn't see the replay of the race, they would then go back to what they personally witnessed when the horses crossed the line. And if they saw it pretty much as I see it, because the judge's box is situated right next door to the commentary box, then they could have declared the result on what they had seen, because it allows for in the rules. And finally, the judge's decision shall be final and binding. There was some talk that trainer Lungagila might lodge an objection against the findings of the judge because he thought that his horse Lana View had won. But let me take you to Rule 68.25, which I found pretty interesting as well. 68.25 says that the following constitute grounds of objection in terms of this rule. So he would have been allowed to object if the judge or his authorized substitute was not in his box at the time the horses passed the winning post, and I can confirm they were, and it is not possible to determine the result of the race from a film or photograph of the finish of the race. So if he had objected, he would not have won that objection because the judge was able to determine the results of the race from the film. So the second part of my notebook is attributed to the same race meeting, and it involved an objection in race 5. The winner, roll of the dice, led from start to finish, and there was definite interference between him and a horse called Schalk, which ran fourth. The distance between the two horses was 2 3/4 lengths. Now, I pointed out in my commentary and also in the slow motion that there was definite interference between the two horses. But again, there were question marks raised as to the objection. Certain people felt that the objection was unwarranted. Let's just quickly tell you about the objection rule and what it states, because it's important to note that an objection can only be upheld if the people that are judging the objection are unanimous in their decision that but for the interference, the result would have been different. Now, remember that it involved fourth against first, which means that horses running second and third weren't involved in the objection. The guys that were sitting on the objection board had to be absolutely certain that had the interference not have occurred, Schalk would have beaten roll of the dice. And unfortunately, a distance of 2 3/4 lengths between first and fourth, you can't categorically say that Schalk would have beaten roll of the dice with that distance between them. There was interference, but 2 3/4 lengths was the question mark. And as a result, unfortunately, for the guys that lodged the objection, the stable of Sharon Kotzen, their deposit was forfeited because it wasn't deemed necessary to lodge an objection. So it's all important about the fact that there was 2 3/4 lengths between first and fourth. Question mark is not about the interference. There was definite interference. Joachim Trottois sat up in his irons and had to drift Slangevar further to the outside and start running on again. He lost his momentum. But you cannot definitively say that Slangevar would have beaten Roll of the Dice with a 2 3/4 length gap in between them at the end of the race. And that just about does it for our look at the racing industry on the Direct Line powered by 10Bet. It's Nico Crusoe signing off for another week with the hope that you'll join us again next week for some important and fascinating aspects of horse racing in South Africa.